Hi everyone, and thank you so much for watching my channel, The Witty Turtle. I really hope that this PGBP revision series has been very useful to you. And if you really find this series useful and helpful, then please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and also share this video with your CA and CMA final and inter friends. Okay, so in today's class we are going to start with section 37. So section 37 of Income Tax Act speaks about general deduction. So what do you mean by general deduction? If any expenditure is not covered under section 30 to section 36, then that expenditure is allowed as a general deduction under section 37, right? Under section 37. But in this section also, there are certain conditions which are supposed to be fulfilled, right? So if you go to the law, then there are four conditions, but we can summarize it into three conditions. Okay, so what is the first condition? The first condition is that it must be a revenue expenditure, right? The expenditure should not be capital in nature. Okay, it must be a revenue expenditure. The second point says that the expenditure should not be in the nature of personal expenditure, right? It should not be in the nature of any personal expense of the SSE. It should always relate to the business or profession of the SSE. And lastly, it says that the expense should not be illegal in nature. Okay, illegal means it should not be incurred for any kind of purpose which is an offense under any law, or which is prohibited under any law, right? So it means it should not be a illegal expense. It should always be a legal expense, right? It should always be a legal expense. So how many conditions are there so that the expenditure can be considered as a general deduction under section 37 subsection 1? So there are total three conditions. The first condition is that it should be revenue in nature. It should be a revenue expenditure. The second point says that it must be incurred for the purpose of business or profession. And the third point says that it should be a legal expense, right? It should not be an offense under any other law, or it should not be illegal under any other law, right? So these are the general clause for claiming deduction under section 37 subsection 1, right? So here there is an explanation to section 37 subsection 1, which says that whether corporate social responsibility expenses are allowed under this section. So the answer is no, it is not allowed under this section, as the CSR expense which you are making under section 135 of Companies Act 2013, that is not allowed as a general deduction in this particular section of income tax. Why? Because it is not a business expenditure, right? It is not treated as a business expenditure. So I know you all must have studied CSR expenditure under your section 135 of Companies Act. So that is not allowed as a deduction in income tax. Why? Because the activities undertaken in pursuance of the ordinary course of business or profession shall not be regarded to CSR activities. So for that reason, as it is not regarded as a CSR activity, so in this case it is not allowed as a general deduction. CSR expenditure is not allowed under PGBP, but if it falls under 80G deduction wala chapter, if it falls under section 80G, then SSC can claim 80G deduction for that, right? Agar whatever expenditure you have incurred as a CSR expense, if that falls under your 80G deduction, then you can claim deduction for that expense under section 80G, but not in this section. Understood? I hope this is clear. The next thing that we are going to study is penalties and interest under various laws, right? So first we need to understand what is the difference between penalty and interest, right? So interest is always compensatory in nature, right? But penalty is always punishable in nature. Penalty कहाँ पे लगता है? Where you are supposed to get a punishment. In that case, whatever amount you have to pay, that is known as your penalty, right? But interest is what? Interest is compensatory in nature. Compensatory means you are supposed to fulfill a particular duty, but you could not do it within a certain time limit. In that case, you are supposed to pay the interest, right? But in case of penalty, if you're supposed to do a particular work and you did not do it, so in that case penalty is laid on you. right? So interest is always compensatory in nature and penalty is always punishable in nature. So here the first thing that we are going to study is penalty for infraction of any law, right? If you are uh, doing any breach, if there is a breach of law and you are being penalized for breach of law, then in that case that particular amount is not allowed as a general deduction under section 37, right? If you have done any breach of law, breach of law means, for example, um, something is written in the law and you did not satisfy the provisions of the law. So in that case, if you have to pay any penalty, then that penalty is not allowed under section 37. But if uh, you are supposed to pay a penalty for the breach of contract where the contract is of revenue nature, right? The contract is of revenue nature and you have done breach of contract, you have done breach of contract. So in that case, whatever amount of penalty you have to pay, that is allowed under this section, right? That is allowed under this section. So what are the two things we studied today? The first is that interest is always compensatory in nature and penalty is always punishable in nature. Now coming to the penalty part, so where you have to pay a penalty for breach of law, then it is not allowed. Breach of law is not allowed. Why? Because law is considered that, because it is a general thing that we should not be ignorant of the law. So for that reason it is not allowed. But if you are doing any breach of contract and the contract is of revenue nature, then in that case what happens? It is allowed as a deduction under section 37, right? Now the next thing is that interest paid under income tax act, so it is not allowable as a deduction. Why? Because I have already told you in the previous classes that any deduction for paying income tax is not allowed, right? Because here obviously income tax is a personal liability. So as this interest is also related to income tax, so again it is not allowed. Now, the next point is that interest paid under any other law, if it is compensatory in nature, which is the natural characteristic of interest, if it is compensatory in nature, then it is allowed. But if the interest is paid in the nature of penalty or punishment, so in that case, it is not allowed. Why not allowed? Because the natural characteristic of interest is being compensatory in nature. But if it is in punishable nature, then it is not allowed, right? So, and yes, another point we forgot to revise is that penalty in the nature of interest, penalty in the nature of interest is allowed, right? If you are paying any penalty, any amount as a penalty, which is compensatory in nature, which is compensatory in nature, so that will be allowed as a deduction, right? So let's summarize whatever we studied now. The first thing is that penalty for infraction of any law under this particular point, 2 points we are supposed to discuss. The first is breach of law. Penalty paid in case of breach of law is not allowed. Penalty paid in case of breach of contract where the contract is of revenue nature, that is allowed. Now the next point is that interest paid under your income tax act is not allowed. Interest paid under your for your income tax or wealth tax is not allowed. Now the next point says that interest in the nature of penalty, interest in the nature of penalty is not allowed, but penalty in the nature of interest is allowed. Now you might be thinking, what is the meaning of interest in the nature of penalty? So I told you that penalty का जो natural characteristic होता है, that is punishable in nature. So interest in the nature of penalty means interest in the nature of punishment, right? That is your not allowed. But penalty in the nature of interest, which means penalty in the nature of compensation, in the incompensatory nature, is always allowed, right? I hope this is clear to you. So before starting this section, I would like to show you something. So these are the some pharmaceutical brands, right? And if you have any doctor in your family, then you might be knowing that they receive some freebies from pharmaceutical companies and also from allied health sector industry, right? So in the beginning of this particular section, we studied that you cannot claim any general deduction under section 37 if that particular expense is prohibited under any other law or it is an offense under any other law, right? So providing these freebies or providing any kind of other things apart from the fees to any medical practitioner is a violation of your Indian Medical Council Regulation 2002, right? Providing these things to the doctors or any medical practitioner is a violation of Indian Medical Council Regulation 2002. So we know that providing this thing is a is prohibited under a particular law, right? So we know that this will the pharmaceutical company is incurring some kind of expense to provide these things to the medical practitioners. So that particular expense of these pen or any other thing is not allowed as a general deduction under this particular section, right? Under this particular section. So it says that in hands of the pharmaceutical companies, the freebies are disallowed under section 37, right? And in hands of the doctor or in hands of the medical practitioner, all these freebies, the amount equivalent to all these freebies, are taxable as PGBP income or income from other sources, depending on the facts of each case, right? For one medical practitioner it can be taxable under PGBP, and for another medical practitioner it can be taxable under your income from other sources, right? Depending upon what are the facts or what are the situation of this particular case, right? And in this section the freebies also include the sample medicines or any kind of gifts, right? Now coming to the next section, which is the coming to the next provision, which was given as a circular under your CBDT. It says that expenditure incurred on key man insurance policy is allowed as a deduction under this particular section, right? We have studied in the very first class what is the meaning of key man insurance policy, right? Whoever is the key person of the business or whoever is the head of the business. So in the name of that particular person, generally key man insurance is made, right? So whatever premium you are paying on in relation to your key man insurance, in that case the premium is allowed as a general deduction under section 37. But the premium on the key man insurance policy or of the partner of the firm is wholly and exclusively for the purpose of business and profession, right? Wholly, it should be wholly for the purpose of the business or profession. In that case only it would be considered as a business expenditure. And if it is considered as a business expenditure, then yes, you can claim deduction under section 37, right? It is allowed. Coming to the next section, that is section 37, clause 2b, it says that any kind of payments made to a political party is not allowed as a general deduction under section 37, right? So, any kind of payments made to a political party for advertisement in any souvenir or any brochure or any pamphlet or any magazine which is published by a particular which is published by any political party, then in that case it is considered as a donation, right? So it is not allowed in your as a general deduction under section 37. Now here another thing we need to remember is that if any Indian company is doing this, if any Indian company is donating some amount to a political party, then that is treated as a donation, even if the Indian company is paying for advertisement in the brochure or pamphlet or magazine of the political party, that is treated as a donation, and that Indian company can claim deduction under section 80 GGB for such expenditure, as it is considered as a donation, right? But under this section, under section 37 2b, it is not allowed as a general deduction, right? I hope this is clear to you. In the next class we will understand some more general deduction under section 37.